The passengers of United Flight 892 would later describe the moment differently, but they all remembered the book. A worn paperback of Hemingway, dog-eared and margin-noted, resting in the hands of the woman in 14C who hadn't looked up once during boarding. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a Georgetown hoodie, reading glasses perched low, but something about her stillness made the flight attendant pause. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, spine straight despite the cramped economy seat, or how her breathing remained steady when the turbulence hit over Kansas. The captain's voice crackled through the cabin at 11:47 a.m. Central Time. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We have a situation." The woman's finger stopped mid-page. "If there is anyone aboard with military aviation experience, particularly rotary or fixed-wing combat training, please identify yourself to the crew immediately." The businessman in 14B would later swear he saw her lips move, counting something under her breath. 5 seconds. That's how long she waited before closing the book, marking her place with a boarding pass that read K. Reeves. What kind of situation requires military training at 37,000 feet? The teenager across the aisle whispered to his mother. The woman in 14C was already standing, moving with an economy of motion that made the narrow aisle seem wider. She didn't rush. She never rushed anymore, not since Kandahar, not since the day she learned that speed without precision was just another form of panic. The lead flight attendant met her halfway. "Ma'am, are you?" Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Reeves, United States Air Force, retired 6 months. Her voice carried the particular flatness of someone who'd given this introduction too many times in too many places where it mattered. 7,000 flight hours, F-16, A-10, and KC-135 qualified. 2 combat tour. She paused. "What's happening?" The flight attendant's relief was visible. "The captain needs to speak with you immediately." As Reeves moved toward the cockpit, passengers craned their necks. Someone was already filming on their phone. Within hours, that shaky footage would have 12 million views, titled "The Passenger Who Saved Flight 892." But none of them could have known what those 7,000 hours really meant, or why she'd spent the last 6 months trying to forget them. The cockpit door sealed behind her with a pneumatic hiss. Captain Morrison turned, and she saw it immediately in his eyes, the controlled fear of a professional facing something beyond protocol. "Colonel Reeves, thank God. We've lost communication with Denver Center. Multiple aircraft are reporting the same, but that's not the problem." He gestured to the windscreen. "That is." Through the crystal-clear morning sky, 17 miles north, flew a formation that shouldn't exist. 4 aircraft in perfect diamond formation, maintaining speed with the commercial traffic, but wrong, all wrong. No identification lights, no contrails, and moving with a precision that made her throat tighten. "How long?" she asked. 14 minutes. Reeves felt the familiar cold settle into her bones, the same sensation from her first combat sortie. The war she'd left behind had followed her home, into economy class, into what should have been a routine flight to her sister's wedding. She reached for the radio, muscle memory guiding her fingers. All aircraft, this is guard emergency traffic." The formation banked as one, turning toward them. Catherine had always wondered if she'd miss it, the moment when training override thought, when the universe narrowed to angles and speeds and the terrible mathematics of survival. Standing in that cockpit, watching death approach at 500 knots, she realized she'd never truly left. The sky didn't let you retire. It just waited. "Captain," she said quietly, "you need to let me fly your plane." Morrison was already unbuckling his harness. 23 years of commercial aviation, and he knew when to defer to expertise. "She's yours, Colonel." Catherine slid into the left seat, her hands finding the yoke with an intimacy that 6 months of self-imposed exile couldn't erase. The 737's weight felt different from a fighter, heavier, more reluctant, but physics was physics. She'd once threaded an A-10 through a mountain pass with half her hydraulics gone and Taliban fire lighting up the canyon walls. This was just math with higher stakes. Denver Center, United 892 Heavy, Military Emergency, Authenticator Tango 779er. The authentication code was 3 years expired, but it would flag every military installation within 500 miles. Silence. The Diamond Formation had closed to 12 miles. At their current speeds, intercept in 90 seconds. Through her headset, she could hear Captain Morrison briefing the flight attendants, his voice steady professional. No one was panicking yet. Panic required understanding, and no one understood what those aircraft meant except her. She'd seen this formation before. Operation Copper Shield, classified beyond classified, the kind of mission that didn't exist in any official record. 4 aircraft had launched from Bagram. 3 had returned. The 4th, her wingman's, had simply vanished from radar over the Hindu Kush. No wreckage, no beacon, no explanation. Command had sealed everything, buried the questions with paperwork and NDAs and medical discharges for anyone who asked too loudly. United 892, you are directed to maintain heading and altitude. The voice came through crystal clear, wrong accent, wrong cadence, wrong everything. Comply immediately. Catherine's finger found the transmit button. Unknown aircraft, you are in violation of United States airspace. Identify yourself and state intentions. Colony leader, we have recognition. Target confirmed. Raven 91 is aboard. Raven 91. Her tactical call signed from Copper Shield, the one that supposedly died with the mission files. Catherine felt the plane's control column trembling slightly under her grip, not turbulence, but her own hands betraying what her voice wouldn't. Captain Morrison, she said without turning, I need you to trust me completely for the next few minutes. Can you do that? Colonel, what? Can you do that? Yes. She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the engines respond. A 737 wasn't built for combat maneuvers, but it wasn't built to be helpless either. Every aircraft was a weapon if you understood physics well enough. She'd learned that from Major Jessica Santos, the best pilot she'd ever known, the one whose aircraft had vanished that day over the mountains. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison's voice filled the cabin, we're experiencing some navigation adjustments. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. The formation matched their speed increase perfectly. Too perfectly. Catherine watched them through her peripheral vision while her hands began a sequence she hadn't performed in 6 months, programming the flight management system for something Boeing never intended. She needed altitude, she needed speed, and she needed everyone on this aircraft to trust a woman they'd never heard of with their lives. Raven 91, you will reduce speed and prepare for escort procedures. She recognized it now, the subtle electronic signature beneath the transmission. Quantum encryption, the kind that didn't exist officially, the kind Copper Shield had been testing when everything went wrong. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more impossible than the last, while her hands continued their work. Colonel, Morrison whispered, those aren't our aircraft, are they? No, she said simply. They're not anyone's aircraft, not anymore. The lead fighter waggled its wings, a warning. Catherine knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before warning became action. 30 seconds to decide if the 237 souls aboard this aircraft would become part of whatever classified horror had followed her from Afghanistan's mountains to Colorado's skis. She thought of the book in her seat pocket, the Hemingway she'd been reading. The Old Man and the Sea, a story about fighting something bigger than yourself, about dignity in the face of inevitable defeat. She'd carried that book through 2 combat tours, reading the same passages whenever the weight became too much. Now, with 4 impossible aircraft closing on her position, she understood why she'd grabbed it this morning. All passengers and crew, she announced over the intercom, breaking every protocol but knowing Morrison wouldn't stop her. This is Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Reeves. In 60 seconds, I'm going to save your lives. It's going to be uncomfortable. Some of you will be sick, but you will survive and you will make it home. That's a promise from someone who's never broken one. The teenage boy in 15A would later tell reporters he'd never heard anyone sound so certain of anything. His phone captured her next words, the ones that would become legend. And to the aircraft pursuing us, Jessica, if that's really you in there, remember what you told me. The sky doesn't belong to those who rule it, but to those who understand it. She pulled back on the yoke hard. The 737 climbed at an angle commercial pilots trained specifically to avoid. The G-forces pressed everyone deep into their seats. Someone screamed. Someone else was praying in Spanish. But Catherine's world had narrowed to mathematics and memory, to the precise calculation of what a fully loaded passenger aircraft could survive versus what 4 military fighters expected it to attempt. The formation broke, scattering like startled birds. For the first time, their movement seemed uncertain, almost confused. Catherine had done something they hadn't predicted, something outside whatever parameters guided them. She'd learned long ago that the best way to fight a superior enemy was to refuse to fight on their terms. United 892, cease climb immediately or we will. She killed the radio mid-threat and banked hard left, using the sun as cover. The maneuver was pure fighter pilot, translated through the sluggish medium of a commercial airliner. It shouldn't have worked. It nearly didn't. But Catherine had once landed an F-16 with no landing gear in a sandstorm, guided only by ground radar and instinct. This was just another impossible thing made possible by refusing to accept the alternative. Her headset crackled with a different frequency, military emergency channel, the one she'd called earlier. Unidentified aircraft maneuvering with United 892, this is Buckley Air Force Base. We have you on radar. F-22s are airborne 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. In aerial combat, 5 minutes was a lifetime. 5 minutes was the difference between heroes and casualties, between headlines and classified reports that no one would ever read. Catherine had to keep 237 people alive for 5 minutes against aircraft that shouldn't exist, using skills she'd tried to forget, in a plane never meant for this purpose. Raven 9-1, this is your final warning. The voice had changed. Younger now, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. It sounded like Jessica, but Jessica was dead, lost over mountains 8,000 miles away. Except nothing about Copper Shield had been what it seemed, and the dead, apparently, didn't always stay buried. Jess, she transmitted on the emergency frequency, hopping, praying that somewhere in those impossible aircraft, something human remained. It's Kit. Catherine, remember the promise we made, before the last mission. You said you'd always have my 6. I'm calling that marker now. The formation reformed, tighter than before, moving to bracket the 737. Catherine could see them clearly now. No markings, no numbers, just sleek death painted in radar-absorbing black. They looked like F-35s, but wrong, evolved, as if someone had taken the design and let it grow wild without human constraints. Captain Morrison was handling the emergency protocols, his voice calm as he coordinated with the cabin crew. The passengers had gone quiet. That terrible silence of people who understood something beyond their control was happening. Catherine had heard that silence before, in a C-130 over Helmand, everyone waiting to see if the next surface-to-air missile would find them. She checked her fuel, ran calculations. They could make Denver barely, if nothing else went wrong. But things had been going wrong since the moment those aircraft appeared, and Catherine had learned to plan for the worst while hopping for nothing. Kit, the word came through clear, impossible, undeniable. Jessica's voice, but hollow, processed, as if spoken through layers of something inhuman. You weren't supposed to be here. Neither were you, Catherine replied, her hands steady on the controls even as her heart hammered. You died. I saw the crash site. I did die, we all did. Copper Shield succeeded, Kit, just not how they planned. The F-22s appeared on radar, closing fast from the south. Catherine felt a moment of relief, then noticed the 4 black aircraft hadn't reacted. They should have broken off, should have run. Instead, they tightened their formation, as if protecting the 737 rather than threatening it. Jess, what happened to you? We found it, Kit, what they were looking for, the thing beyond the mountains. It found us back. A pause filled with electronic static that might have been breathing. They're coming for everyone who knew, everyone who touched the project. You were supposed to be safe. You were discharged. I was running, Catherine admitted. Didn't work. No, it never does. The sky remembers everything. The F-22s were 2 minutes out now, weapons hot, locked onto the strange aircraft. Catherine knew what would happen next. A brief fight, violence at 30,000 feet, and then explanations that would never quite add up. Unless she changed the script. Buckley Control, United 892, hold your fire. Repeat, weapons hold. These aircraft are not hostile. It was a lie, but maybe not entirely. They hadn't fired, hadn't forced her down. They'd followed, they'd threatened, but they hadn't acted. That meant something. United 892, confirm your last. I am Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Reeves, authentication Delta 9973. I am declaring a classified event under Operation Copper Shield protocols. Check your databases. Weapons hold. She could imagine the chaos in Buckley's command center, officers scrambling to verify codes for an operation that didn't officially exist. But it would buy time, and time was all she needed. Kit, Jessica's voice again, closer somehow, as if she were standing in the cockpit. You can't save us. We're already gone, but you can save them. The passengers, there's a way. Tell me. You have to fly through us, literally through our formation. It will break the lock, reset the parameters. We won't be able to follow. It was insane. Flying a commercial airliner through a military formation at altitude was suicide. But Catherine had learned to recognize truth in impossible situations, and Jessica, whatever Jessica had become, was telling the truth. Why help me? Because I remember my promise. I've always got your 6, even now, even like this. But Kit, after you do this, you have to disappear. Really disappear. They'll come for you, the ones who made us. Copper Shield isn't over. It's just beginning. Catherine looked at Captain Morrison, who'd heard everything. He was pale but steady, a professional to his core. Your aircraft, Colonel, your call. She thought of the 237 souls trusting her, thought of the book in her seat, thought of all the promises she'd made and broken over the years. But mostly, she thought of Jessica Santos, the best pilot she'd ever known, somehow both dead and here, offering her one last wingman assist from beyond whatever veil separated them. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, in 30 seconds we'll be experiencing some unusual turbulence. It will be brief but intense. Flight attendants secure positions. She turned to Morrison. After this is over, you never saw me. I was never here. Can you do that? He nodded slowly. Who do I say saved us? No one. Sometimes salvation comes from nowhere and returns to nothing. The F-22s were 60 seconds out. The black aircraft held formation, waiting. Catherine pushed the throttles forward again, building speed for what came next. She'd need every knot, every pound of thrust, every prayer anyone on board could muster. Jess, that book you borrowed and never returned, The Right Stuff. You still owe me $20 for it. A sound that might have been laughter processed through inhuman systems. Add it to my tab, Kit. Now fly. Fly like you did that night over Kandahar. Fly like the world depends on it. Catherine aimed for the exact center of their formation, the point where all 4 aircraft created a window of empty sky. It would be like threading a needle at 500 miles per hour, with no second chances, no ejection seats, no backup plan. Just skill, physics, and whatever ghost in the machine still remembered being human. The passengers would later describe the sensation differently. Some said it felt like falling upward. Others mentioned a sound like singing or screaming or both. The teenager with the phone caught the moment on video, the 737 diving through the formation, the black aircraft peeling away like smoke, and then nothing. Empty sky, as if they'd never existed at all. Catherine pulled out of the dive at 28,000 feet, the airframe groaning but holding. Her hands were steady as she leveled off, as she restored normal flight parameters, as she turned to Captain Morrison and said simply, "Your aircraft, Captain." By the time the F-22s arrived, there was nothing to intercept. Just a commercial flight with a minor navigation deviation, already correcting back to course. The radar records would show anomalies, but radar records could be lost, classified, buried in the same vault where Copper Shield resided. Morrison took the controls and Catherine stood. "Where are you going?" "Back to my seat. I have a book to finish." She walked through the cabin, past passengers who stared at her with awe, confusion, fear. Some reached out to touch her, as if to confirm she was real. She neither acknowledged nor avoided them. She was already becoming what she needed to be: a story, a rumor, a woman who might or might not have been there when the impossible happened. In her seat, she picked up the Hemingway, found her page. The old man was still fighting his fish, still refusing to surrender despite the impossibility of victory. She understood him better now. Sometimes the fight itself was the victory, the refusal to yield the only triumph that mattered. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Thank you, Jay." She deleted it immediately, then removed the SIM card, snapping it between her fingers. When they landed in Denver, she would walk off this plane and disappear. Really disappear, as Jessica had warned. There were places in the world where even Copper Shield couldn't reach, where a retired lieutenant colonel could become no one, where the sky might finally let her go. But first, she would finish her book. She would land with these people she'd saved. She would complete this last mission, even if no one would ever know it had been a mission at all. Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Denver. Weather is clear, winds calm. We should have you on the ground in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Catherine had been in firefights that lasted 20 minutes. She'd lost friends in less time, saved lives in less time, changed the course of wars in less time. 20 minutes was nothing. 20 minutes was everything. The teenager across the aisle was still filming, trying to catch her face. She turned slightly, keeping her features obscured. By tomorrow, the internet would be full of theories, terrorist plots, alien encounters, government conspiracies. None would come close to the truth. The truth was classified beyond classification, locked behind walls of denial and death. "Ma'am," the flight attendant appeared beside her, "the captain wanted me to give you this." She handed Catherine an envelope, then moved on before any response was possible. Inside was a simple note in Morrison's handwriting. "Some of us know how to keep secrets. Thank you." And beneath it, a pair of wings, pilot's wings, the kind they gave to children who visited the cockpit. A joke, perhaps, or maybe recognition that what had happened here transcended rank and protocol. Catherine pocketed the wings and returned to her book. The old man was losing his fight now, the sharks taking his fish piece by piece. But he wasn't stopping, wasn't surrendering. He would return to port with nothing but bones and story, and that would be enough. It would have to be enough. Through the window, Denver approached, mountains rising from plains like promises of sanctuary. Somewhere in those peaks were places where satellites couldn't see, where a person could vanish into elevation and silence. She'd already chosen her route, planned her disappearance with the same precision she'd once planned combat missions. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thump. Around her, passengers began preparing for arrival, phones returning to life, overhead bins opening, the ordinary rituals of travel resuming. As if nothing had happened. as if the world hadn't tilted off its axis for 17 minutes above Colorado. Catherine closed the book, leaving it in the seat pocket. Someone else would find it, read about the old man and his fish, and maybe understand something about fighting impossible fights. Or maybe they just see a forgotten book, water-damaged and annotated by someone who'd had too much time to think about metaphors. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Denver International Airport. Local time is 12:43 p.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. She would be the last to leave, Catherine decided. Let the others exit first. Let the story begin to spread without her face attached to it. The teenager would upload his video, the passengers would tell their versions, and somewhere in a classified facility, analysts would try to piece together what had happened to their experimental aircraft. They would never find them. Catherine knew this with the certainty of someone who'd seen behind too many curtains. The aircraft were gone, returned to wherever Copper Shield had found them, or fled to, or become. Jessica and the others, she stopped herself. Better not to think about what they were now, what they'd been transformed into during those missing months after the mountain swallowed them. The plane touched down smoothly, Morrison's experience evident in every microadjustment. Catherine felt the wheels grab runway, the engines reverse, the beautiful physics of deceleration. She'd landed aircraft with blown tires, with damaged control surfaces, with fuel tanks reading empty. But this landing, this ordinary commercial touchdown, felt like the most important of her career. Because she'd kept her promise, she'd saved them all. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, her phone, the one she hadn't destroyed, buzzed again. This time, a news alert. Military aircraft reported over Colorado. Air Force denies training exercise. It was beginning. The questions, the investigations, the careful construction of alternative explanations. By evening, there would be official statements about whether balloons reflected light, mass hysteria. The passengers would be interviewed, their accounts dismissed as confusion, stress, misidentification, and Catherine Reeves would be nowhere to be found. The seatbelt sign went off. People stood, gathered belongings, began the slow shuffle toward the exit. Catherine remained seated, watching them go. The businessman from 14B paused beside her. "That was you, wasn't it? You saved us." She looked up at him, letting him see her face clearly for the first and last time. "I was just reading my book, sir. Turbulence makes everyone imagine things." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Right, of course, just turbulence." But he reached out, squeezed her shoulder once, and whispered, "Thank you." After he left, Catherine sat alone in the emptying aircraft. Captain Morrison appeared from the cockpit, and they regarded each other in silence. Finally, he spoke. "There's a maintenance exit in the back. Leads directly to the tarmac. Security cameras have a blind spot there. Hypothetically." "Hypothetically," she agreed. "Colonel Reeves," he said formally, "it's been an honor." "The honor was mine, Captain. Take care of your bird." She stood, walked past him toward the back of the plane. At the maintenance exit, she paused, looking back at the empty cabin. Somewhere in whatever command center monitored Copper Shield's disasters, alarms were sounding. Somewhere, Jessica and the others were returning to wherever the mountain had taught them to exist. Somewhere, 237 people were going home with a story no one would believe. Catherine opened the door and stepped out into Denver's thin air and bright sun. She had 3 hours before they realized she was gone, 6 before they started looking seriously, 12 before they understood she'd vanished as completely as those aircraft. She walked across the tarmac with the confidence of someone who belonged there, past ground crews who didn't question a woman moving with military purpose. At the perimeter fence, a service gate stood conveniently open, a delivery truck blocking the camera's view. Coincidence, perhaps, or maybe Captain Morrison had friends. On the other side, Denver stretched out, a city where a person could disappear into mountains or plains, where a retired lieutenant colonel could become anyone or no one. Catherine had saved one last life today, her own. Behind her, United Flight 892 sat at the gate, passengers disembarking with their impossible story. Within hours, the internet would explode with theories. Within days, officials would provide explanations. Within weeks, it would become another mystery, another unexplained event in a world full of them. But for 17 minutes above Colorado, Catherine Reeves had flown against the impossible and won. She'd threaded a commercial airliner through a gap that shouldn't have existed, guided by a ghost who remembered love, and landed 237 souls safely in defiance of whatever Copper Shield had become. The mountains called to her, altitude and silence, places where the sky touched Earth gently, where a person could read books and forget about classified missions that birthed impossibilities. She had money hidden, identities prepared, routes planned. 6 months of retirement had been preparation for this moment, though she hadn't known it until today. As she walked away from the airport, Catherine thought about the promise Jessica had made, about always having her six. Even transformed, even impossible, even dead, her wingman had kept that promise. The least Catherine could do was honor the warning, disappear, really disappear, before Copper Shield's architects came looking for the one who got away. A bus pulled up to the stop ahead of her. Downtown Denver, then the mountains, then nowhere. She boarded without looking back, found a seat by the window and watched the airport fade behind her. Somewhere in the terminal, the teenager was uploading his video. Somewhere in the sky, F-22 pilots were filing reports about aircraft that vanished. Somewhere in the classified depths of military intelligence, her name was being flagged, searched, hunted. But Catherine Reeves was already becoming someone else, something else. A ghost story told by passengers, a mystery that would never quite be solved. She'd been the woman reading in 14C until the moment demanded she become something more. Now she would return to anonymity, to books and quiet, and the kind of peace that came from knowing you'd answered when called. The bus pulled away from the airport, heading toward mountains that promised sanctuary. Catherine settled into her seat, already planning her route, her new identity, her next chapter. Behind her, the story was just beginning, headlines and investigations, theories and denials. But her part was over. She'd flown her last mission, saved her last lives, kept her last promise. The sky had finally let her go. Or so she thought until she saw the reflection in the bus window, 4 birds flying in perfect diamond formation, too high to be natural, too precise to be coincidence. Following, watching, waiting. Jessica's warning echoed, "Copper Shield isn't over, it's just beginning." Catherine closed her eyes, calculating distances, routes, probabilities. The war she'd left in Afghanistan had followed her home, transformed into something beyond warfare, beyond understanding. But she'd survived 17 minutes of impossible combat in an aircraft never meant for it. She could survive this too. The bus climbed toward the mountains, toward sanctuary or another battle, toward an ending that hadn't been written yet. Catherine Reeves, pilot, soldier, ghost, rode toward her future, carrying the weight of 237 lives saved and the knowledge that sometimes the sky didn't let you retire. It just changed the terms of engagement. The story would spread from passenger to passenger, each telling shifting the narrative slightly. The businessman would swear she'd been calm as stone. The teenager would insist she'd moved faster than anyone he'd ever seen. The flight attendants would remember her voice, professional, certain, absolute. Captain Morrison would say nothing at all, which would become its own kind of testimony. By nightfall, the internet would have a dozen theories. By morning, 100. The footage would be analyzed, enhanced, disputed. Experts would weigh in. The Air Force would issue statements. And through it all, the truth would remain locked behind classification stamps and the silence of those who knew better than to speak. But in Seat 14C of United Flight 892, a forgotten book would tell its own story. The margins filled with notes about courage and duty, about promises kept and prices paid. Someone would find it, read those annotations, and understand that heroes sometimes came disguised as tired women reading Hemingway, waiting for the moment when the world would need them to be more. Catherine Reeves had been more. For 17 minutes above Colorado, she'd been everything: pilot, warrior, savior. Now she would become nothing, no one, a shadow moving through mountains toward a future uncertain but earned. The bus climbed higher, Denver falling away below. Behind them, the airport continued its ordinary operations, as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't changed. But for 237 passengers, for Captain Morrison, for the fighter pilots who'd arrived to find empty sky, everything had changed. And somewhere in the classified depths of a program that didn't exist, someone was reading a report about 4 experimental aircraft that had vanished, about a passenger manifest with one name that raised flags, about a lieutenant colonel who disappeared as completely as the threat she'd faced. They would look for her. They would fail. Because Catherine Reeves had learned the most important lesson of survival. Sometimes the only way to win was to stop playing the game entirely. The mountains embraced the bus, tall peaks and deep valleys, places where satellites struggled and human presence became optional. Catherine had chosen her sanctuary well. She would vanish here, become someone new, someone without a past full of classified missions and impossible choices. But first, she would remember. She would honor Jessica and the others, transformed into something beyond human but still capable of love, of memory, of keeping promises. She would remember the weight of 237 lives in her hands and the feeling of threading a needle at 30,000 feet. She would remember being the woman in 14C who closed her book when duty called. The bus rolled on through falling dusk, toward futures unwritten, toward endings unscripted. Behind them, the story grew, evolved, became legend. The passenger who saved Flight 892, the woman who flew through the impossible, the ghost who disappeared into Denver's mountains, leaving only questions and a book full of notes about courage. Catherine Reeves smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she'd allowed herself in 6 months. She'd answered her last call, flown her last mission, saved her last souls. Now she could rest, could read, could find peace in anonymity. The sky had let her go. Finally, mercifully, impossibly, it had let her go. But in the reflection of the bus window, those 4 birds continued their perfect formation, patient as death, certain as gravity, watching, waiting, reminding her that some wars never really ended. They just waited for the next chapter to begin.